Breathe it in. Don't you just love the smell of a fresh new world? It's been so long. I spawned in on a stony beach next to a plains, which was great for me to quickly knock up some basic tools, and I could see some tasty food on the horizon, so I went hunting straight off the bat.
I am shocked. Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
I also found some sheep who generously gave me their wool to make a bed, and stumbled across a destroyed nether portal which gave me some basic gold armor and my first iron ore. As I continued to explore spawn and the sun started to dip below the horizon, it slowly dawned on me that I may actually be here on a small island. First thing on day 2, I quickly confirmed that yes, I was indeed on a small island, so I constructed a boat and set off to find a village. And I was in luck. Just around the corner on the very next island, I found a village, met the locals, introduced myself to their stuff, and had a polite conversation with security. He then gave me iron. What a hero. The village didn't have much else going for it, however, so I trapped a few of them in their houses and decided to continue my exploration and get my bearings. By nightfall, I found myself on top of a hill, scouted in the surroundings, and realizing I needed to pick somewhere to set up a starter base. At the start of day 3, from my vantage point, I spotted a nice looking area for a starter base. It was basically just a sparse jungle, which meant bright green grass and not too many trees to clear. It was also surrounded by a river and many varieties of wood. It was perfect. I made my way down and claimed my spot with a bed, a chest, a furnace, and a crafting table. And another chest. I would soon need shelter over my head, however my primary concern was now iron. I had enough for a few basic tools and I had plenty of food thanks to that generous village, but I wanted armor, and would also need lots of iron to get started with automation. I quickly found a nearby cave, which immediately introduced me to long-range violence, so I promptly made a shield and dealt with the pests. I spent the next few days and nights underground searching for shiny things and battling the demons of the underworld. I mean, they were just skeletons and zombies, but I've got to make it sound dramatic, right? And I even found a skeleton spawner, which would probably come in handy later. The chests in this spawn room also had a saddle, which made me very happy, and some horse armor. So yeah, a horse is in our future. I'm sure it'll be fine and survive the whole 100 days, right? I then explored a bit further, found a big cave, got some diamonds, and ran away from a small child. As the sun came up on day 5, I still didn't have very much iron. Not very much at all. I'd actually turned most of it into pickaxes while underground to carry on digging for more iron. So I turned my first 3 diamonds into a diamond pick, grabbed some food, and decided to hop in my boat to try and use my pickaxes more efficiently, and actually get as much iron as possible with them. And that meant I needed to go up. So I set off downriver in search of higher terrain. I immediately came across some horses, however, and decided that would probably be a better way to travel, as this river was coming to an end. So I went back to my little base, grabbed my saddle and horse armor, and searched for the fastest horse I could find. It wasn't very fast, however, so I soon swapped him out. And as the day was drawing to a close, I wandered into a nearby savannah village and stole one of their beds by booting out its current occupant. Next day, I explored the township and did a bit of shopping, which I'm sure the locals definitely approved of and allowed me to do. I then had another chat with security, who once again gave me iron. Win. I stayed in the village much longer than I expected, as I spent way too long trying to find my horse, who wandered off really quickly. But as I rode off, I saw exactly what I wanted in the distance. A nice tall mountain that'll have iron on it. So that's exactly where I headed, pickaxe in hand, and spent the rest of the day scaling the mountain trying to get as much iron ore as possible. On day 7, I woke on the mountain and continued to harvest iron. I clearly didn't sleep early enough, however, and had a run-in with some creepers, got shot by a skeleton, poisoned by a witch, and died. I then found myself back at world spawn as I'd literally just slept on the mountain. So I punched a tree. Not out of anger, I just needed a boat to get back. I went via my base area, grabbed my old tools and some food, then carried on to reclaim my gear. I forgot to set my spawn, however, and it was soon getting dark, so I bullied some sheep, made a bed, and then continued my journey into day 8. As I approached the mountain, the weather turned, which didn't bode well. I did, however, easily scale back to the top of the mountain, dispatching foes along the way until I rounded a corner and there was all my stuff. I hastily collected it all up, and the only thing I was actually missing was the iron ore I'd already gathered, which was a bit of bad luck. I searched all over the side of the mountain, but I couldn't find it anywhere, so I set about grabbing all the iron ore the mountain still had to offer. One problem, though. Thankfully, past Beardy was clever, and he had set spawn on the side of the mountain, so it didn't take long for me to get back to where I just died. I dispatched a few more nasties, and collected back slightly less stuff than I actually had before. A lot of it appeared to have fallen off the side of the mountain though, so I took a leap of faith and collected up a little bit more. I was still missing some things, but by this point I didn't really care anymore. I still had my iron and I needed more, because I still didn't have very much. So back up the mountain I went. I spent day 9 mining more iron, but this was proving not to be a very good technique, as I was struggling to actually find much. I also left it a bit late again and bad things started appearing, so I launched off the mountain again, had a nap, grabbed my horse, and set off back home to try a new plan. Only 39 iron ore after all that effort, that wasn't going to cut it. It was time to automate. I set off, shearing every sheep along the way, as wool is going to come in very handy, and I found this cute dog on the way that wanted to be my friend. Aww. This one didn't. Bad dog. I got home, put my horse in a horse hole because I didn't have any leads yet, smelted some iron and chopped some wood. As the sun started going down on day 10, I went to bed because tomorrow was going to be a big day. We were finally going to start building. Next morning, I cleared some dirt and threw down some tough variants to make a platform, then finally started on Create. I created a very small power setup to get some basic machines running using water wheels. Next morning, I added up a mechanical press to the power, then I made myself some goggles and a wrench. Key items in Create. The mechanical press was very, very slow, however, so it did take a moment to get the gold plates I needed. It was about this time I realised I was going to run out of my very low iron supplies at any moment, so I started to make myself a drill contraption that should make the search for iron a little easier. As the sun went down on day 12, I realised I was also going to need super glue, which meant I needed slime. How in the world was I going to get that? Day 13, I woke up fresh and I realised it should actually be fairly simple. Firstly, I'd need to make a millstone, grow some wheat, and then grind it down to make wheat flour. I could then turn this into dough by mixing it with water. I cracked out my shears for a few days earlier, harvested some ferns from nearby, and crushed them in the millstone to get green dye. I could then combine this with white dye made from bone meal to get lime dye, and craft this with the dough to get slime. Easy. I could now make glue. Or not. I needed one iron nugget, and I literally had none whatsoever. Typical. I popped back below the surface, located a few pieces I'd missed on my earlier visit, and now we could make our glue. It was bedtime again. Day 14 arrived and I managed to make a few more drills with the extra iron I'd just collected, but now my drill was wonky, so I went back underground to grab even more iron. I found a patch of 8 pieces, which made me very happy, so I smelted it up, made another drill, glued the whole thing together, and went to go do some auto mining just below the surface. It was here I realised I had a problem, however. I needed a deployer to place the track. This was an issue. Deployers need brass, and brass needed blaze burners as well as a bunch more iron. It got dark again as I realised this, so I cried myself to sleep. On day 15, I made the decision to go to the Nether and try to capture a blaze. First up, I needed obsidian, so I set off on my nameless horse and found a nearby portal ruin. Got what I needed and found some gold horse armor as well, which was a lovely bonus. Back at my makeshift base, I made a blaze burner and a portal, then jumped into the unknown. It was not good. As I hovered precariously over a lava lake in a basalt biome, everyone's favourite thing to do when they first go to the Nether, I decided safety was paramount. Blocking up the back of the portal and creating a box around the front of it, I definitely felt a bit safer. I then scouted out the area, saw no good options of travel, so decided just to tunnel. This went fine until I got pinned by bouncy flame boys, whom I eventually dispatched off the ledge, and then I continued bridging. I found a bastion that I chose to ignore as I was not even slightly ready for that, and continued bridging to find a fortress, finally finding solid ground, although it was slow in places. It wasn't long though before I was back to bridging over lava lakes, and another structure began to loom out of the distance. Sadly, it was another bastion, so I once again ignored it and moved onwards. Just around the corner, however, a fortress. I have no idea how long I'd been down here by now, but it was a glorious sight to see, so I snuck up a pillar, dispatched some wither skeletons, grabbed a blaze, and legged it home. I managed to find my path back, but as I approached the basalt delta, I saw one of my bridges had been taken over by bouncy flame boys. I bravely faced off against my adversaries, knocking them one at a time into... Oh. I rage quit and made tea. It turns out that I rage quit so hard I forgot to hit record when I came back with a fresh cuppa, but luckily replay mod was running, so this whole bit's going to be a bit cinematic. So it was day 17, I prepped for my second run and I dove straight back into the Nether. As I sprinted across my bridges, I almost met lava again in the very same place on the same bridge. But I made it to the fortress, snatched a blaze, ran all the way back safely this time, and then placed the burner. I now needed a whole bunch of iron again to make a whisk, so I went back to the mines. A short while later, I only had a small amount of iron, but it'll be enough. I made the mechanical whisk in a basin, then hooked it up to the power. Although I did have to remove the press and millstone to actually get it working. On day 19, I could finally make brass. So on my quest to get a deployer, I made a brass hand, but I still needed rose quartz. Sadly, I'd left my quartz at the bottom of a lava lake, so popped back to the Nether to get more, just one, and then converted it to rose quartz and sanded it. I could then make my employer, attach it to the drill, glue on some more chests, and I was finally ready to go mining. And if you've watched my channel for a while, you'll know what that means. Cue the mining music. After mining all through day 20, it was dark when I came up, so I had a quick nap. I woke to an explosive surprise and then went to go check on my iron haul. Good news, I was recording now, so I don't have to spend hours in replay mod anymore. I had just under a stack of iron, meaning I could finally get myself a full set of iron armor. I then emptied the drill contraption of all its goodies, which would come in very handy when I actually start building buildings. And then I worked on making my drill more effective, had a nap, glued it together, and went back to the mines for more iron. After a few days mining at higher levels for iron, on day 25 I dug down to diamond level to try and get myself some deep slate, a whole bunch of tough, redstone, and, well, hopefully, diamonds. The mining started badly though, as I went over a lava pit and destroyed the minecart on my contraption. Not to worry though, I just needed another deployer to rectify this situation and stop it from happening again, which did mean however I needed more quartz and sanding, but it only took a moment. On the morning of day 26 I completed the new deployer and made a new furnace minecart, then headed back down to the mines. I moved the deployers around a little bit and set it to place blocks in front of the rail, which should prevent any further incidents. It did not. I don't even know what happened here. But I wasn't going to put up with this sort of stuff, so I set off in a different direction with much more success. A short while later, I arrived back at the surface as day 27 was drawing to a close. I offloaded the drill and had all the resources. I was very happy. On day 28, it was finally time to start automation. I can't believe it took me this long, but here we are. I spent the day building a giant platform with tough variants to make it more interesting, and then next day got to work. I started day 29 by dismantling a bunch of trees as I really needed wood, and then I mixed up some andesite alloy in the basin as it doubles the return value from crafting it manually, which considering my surprisingly still limited amount of iron was a good thing. I realised I could have used zinc instead of iron, but I didn't realise that at the time. I realise that now as I'm editing this, so not particularly helpful. I put a small array of water wheels beneath the platform to give me a bunch of power to get started with, and then next day routed the power up to the platform and got to work making a speed controller, which meant I needed a precision mechanism, which took absolutely forever. First thing next morning, I entered the brass age, made the speed controller, and was much happier as I could now finally start on the cobble generator. Or so I thought. But nope, I needed kelp to make belts. So I hopped in my boat and went out to sea, which was thankfully fairly close by, grabbed a bunch of kelp, headed home, planted some in my river, and then smelted the rest. I took a quick nap and then got to work setting up the generator. Basic one would do for now. I just wanted to automate iron and then build a workshop. From there, we could then start on a factory, but one step at a time, Beardy. It took a couple of days to cannibalize my old drill, craft the components I needed to get the generator ready to turn on, but day 34 started with me adding even more water wheels, as the system was overstressed already, despite the fact I'd already halved the speed on the speed controller. On day 35, I realised I was going to need a mechanical crafter before I could proceed, as I needed some crushing wheels. So into the Nether I went and managed to find a few small patches of quartz, because that was going to be needed, so I polished it up, made the crafters, and assembled them in a random spot on my platform. We'll give them a proper home later. Probably, maybe. With my newly constructed crushing wheels in hand, I put down a belt to steel cobble and turn it into gravel, then added a washer system below the gravel vault to convert the gravel into iron, which we filtered into a small vault, and flint, which for now I'd just left to despawn. This whole thing is just a temporary setup to generate iron for me as I start to plan a workshop, and actual building. But to do this, I first needed to adventure. There was no way I could build a proper building without spruce, so I grabbed my boat, jumped in the river, and headed back out to sea in search of new lands. My exploration was fairly uneventful at first, although I did stop by the local savannah to grab some acacia saplings, and round the corner stumbled across a village. A quick raid of the houses, and I found another saddle and some very rare in-item form tall grass, but not much else of interest, so I just cracked on. As the scenery morphed into epic mountains, I began to wish I came here when I was desperate for iron. But sadly, it was all still jungle, not the spruce I was after, so I kept rowing towards the sunset. I spotted a derelict portal, so I pulled up and found an enchanted golden apple. I celebrated by sleeping. My journey continued into day 38, looting shipwrecks, picking sunflowers, and passing a continuous coastline of warm biome after warm biome, with no spruce in sight. Fairly soon, I found myself alone on the ocean, no land in sight as far as the eye could see. A few minutes later, and land started to appear through the mist, however, and would you believe it, it was more jungle. I decided I'd like to actually get something done in this 100 days video, so I looked up the world seed, went to chunk base, and quickly discovered the spruce was everywhere that I wasn't. And the same went for dark oak and mangrove. I decided to head south to where I could get spruce and dark oak adjacent to each other. I could then head east to get mangrove and go north to hopefully find my home again. It was going to be a long few days, and the sun was already setting on day 38 as I adjusted course and carried on rowing. My journey south was once again fairly uneventful. I passed a cherry blossom biome, however, and grabbed some saplings along the way, then continued on until eventually I could see the telltale signs of a dark oak forest on the horizon. As I arrived, the sun was setting, so I went to grab my bed, which I'd clearly not picked up again after my last sleep, so I backtracked to some local sheep willing to donate their wool. A quick nap later, and on day 40 I was back at the dark oak forest, grabbed some saplings, and then journeyed to get some spruce. I stumbled across an azalea tree along the way, so I took the opportunity to dig up some rooted dirt before heading round the corner to get spruce saplings. A few minutes later and my main mission was complete. And at this stage, I didn't really care about the mangrove anymore, so I picked a rough direction I thought was home and set off on my return journey. I ran through the day and rode through the night, and eventually got back on the morning of day 42. Greeted by a thunderstorm and a creeper, so I decided just to sleep the day away and skip to day 43. I went to check on my iron farm and realised that iron nuggets are not useful to me in that form, so I installed a new belt with a basin and a smasher to turn it all into iron ingots. I then added a depot and a funnel for easy withdrawals. Once again, this was just temporary, so how it looks wasn't important right now. I then got to work making a tree farm, which required a bit of space to be created, and a hole with a water wheel and mechanical bearing followed. Next day, I began constructing a bunch of mechanical saws and deployers, got them in place, assigned a bunch of different saplings to the deployers for variety in my wood, and then set it going just as the sun dropped on day 44. On day 45, I forgot to hit record again, so we're back in replay mod, and I was going to start planning my workshop, then realised I hadn't actually played with any of the new create stuff yet, so I diverted my plans to instead make an automated storage warehouse. This meant I needed more tuff to make a platform, so I briefly popped underground to grab what I need, while the tree farm did its thing and got me lots of wood. I added a building platform near to the first one I had, and made it a reasonable size, but as the next day rolled round, I realised I could do with it looking a little bit nicer in the surroundings, so I added a bunch of dirt to raise the ground up to the platform, on one side at least. I'll do the other bit later. On day 47, I examined my resources to make the decision on what I was going to use to actually build this warehouse. I settled on a combination of dark oak, diorite and acacia, so I got down a frame, built up the walls, and just about managed to get the roof trim on before the sun set. Next morning I filled in the roof with acacia, and my very basic looking warehouse structure was in. I still had to make it look good, but first, I wanted to figure out how I was going to do the storage system itself. First thing I'd need is a whole lot of vaults, so I got to work making iron sheets and barrels. It wasn't the fastest thing in the world, but by nightfall I'd installed enough vaults to get me started. On day 49, I needed to work out how to make all the fancy things, including packages, frogports, chain conveyors, and stock links. I started with the conveyors as they seemed simple, and I was right. I got them installed in no time. The packages, however, were going to be more of an issue, as I needed cardboard, and I had no idea how to make that. Turns out it wasn't too difficult. I just needed to throw saplings into a mixer with some water, then compress the pulp into cardboard and convert that into a block. I can now add my packages, and with the addition of a few frog ports, we were halfway there. I built a small desk to one side, which will turn into our storage interface, added more packages and frogs, and then ran off to go to sleep. Next morning, I remembered to hit record, so we jump back into first person as I make a bunch of transmitters on my path to making stock links and a stock ticker to link everything together. I added a pulse timer to make the packager that will add things to storage fire off every 3 seconds, and now all I needed was a bit of power to the chain and a storage clerk, and then we should be good to start using the system in its basic form. Power was simple enough. I just attached a couple of gearboxes, routed a shaft below the building, but I did need a precision mechanism. It did not go well first time round, and I got a clock, but the second time was successful. I then installed the speed controller alongside a couple of water wheels so we could run the chain conveyor at high speed. I can now put things into storage. Excellent. I couldn't get them out, however, as I needed a clerk, and for that, I really wanted a villager. So I went to the local village and hired a willing participant. See? He nodded. I tricked him into the warehouse with the promise of barrels, then nudged him into position and grabbed a clipboard so I could set the addresses. I then started loading up storage, which kept me up most of the night. I did finally get a nap, however, shortly before a creeper came to say hi and remove my last remaining items. Oh well, we had a new storage place now anyhow. With storage sorted, it was time to start planning the workshop, and for that, I was going to need a few things. Mostly clay to make terracotta and bricks, so I raided the local river and gathered up all I could lay my eyes on. Upon my return, I went to bed, and next morning discovered I was incredibly low on food. It was time to make a quick crop farm, so I spent the day doing just that, using the new storage system to not only get what I need, but when combined with JEI, it also gave me the ingredients to make what I didn't have. This thing is genius. As the sun went down, I placed some torches around my completed farm and took a nap before heading out to get more clay balls. Armed with apples for food, as that was all I had left at this stage. I spent the whole day gathering clay, and by the end of it, I still didn't really have anywhere near as much as I needed. But what I did have lots of, however, was cobble, and I could turn that into clay. So next day, I set my mechanical crafter back up, made some more crushing wheels, and set up yet more temporary machines so I could crush cobble into gravel, then crush the gravel into sand, and wash the sand to get clay, which is what I spent all of day 56 and 57 doing. Just making clay. By day 58, I figured I had enough, so converted a bunch of it into clay blocks, turned my washer into a smelter, and made terracotta. I then turned the rest into bricks and crafted them into brick blocks. Day 59 came around much quicker than I'd have liked, but we did at least have everything we need to make a start on our workshop. However, there was a problem in that my temporary iron farm platform was in the way, and quite frankly, was much bigger than it needed to be. So I pulled out my pick and began shrinking it down to size and prepping the ground around it for a workshop. This carried me all through to the next day as well, and then as darkness fell, I had another giant platform to build on, but in a more convenient place this time. On day 61, I grabbed some blocks and started marking out where the building would go. I decided on cyan terracotta alongside brick and granite variants for the different parts of the building, then started placing blocks and basically hoping for the best. I built all through day 62, gradually working out the shape and height, added a balcony type area, then started on the second level. I worked through the night and the following day until I had a pretty big structure, but no roof, and it had just started raining. I ran through and added some windows and started adding the second floor, but as night drew in, I needed to decide what blocks to use for the roof itself. I was, however, trapped by all the nasty things, so I took a leap of faith and ran to my bed. Then I logged out to make some tea. The next couple of days were spent making the balcony safe and installing the roof. I decided on deep slate for the back with an acacia and jungle trim for the side. I finished off with andesite for the main flat roof, and by the end of day 65, the shell of the building was complete. It needed to look better though, so I made some grey dye from squid remains, mixed it into concrete powder, and placed an order with my storage clerk. I proceeded to spend the next few days detailing the build, texturing the brick with granite and terracotta, adding shafts, pipes, fans, tanks, and some features to generally try and make it look a bit more lived in. To add to the clutter, I constructed a bunch of random create items, including mechanical arms, cuckoo clocks, speed things, spinny things, copper things, and more, which I then stacked up around the exterior of the building to make it look busy. I installed some water wheels and patched up the grass out front. Then I went to install more water wheels and met my doom. So glad this wasn't a hardcore world. I then went to retrieve my stuff, and this turned out to be a bad idea. I love a couple more attempts and I retrieved what I could, but I'd lost my wrench, most of my tools, and a whole bunch of water wheels. Sadly, I had no gold remaining at all to make a new wrench, so I snuck into the Nether and pinched some from the local bastion. I made a new wrench, replaced the rest of my tools, and then set to getting power in my new workshop on day 74. By the time night fell, I finally had power, and the next day I began to construct my workshop. Routing the power around the building side and into the ground floor, I worked through the night, cannibalizing parts from my iron farm and constructing new items, then continued this throughout day 76. By the end of the day, I could now smelt, cook, haunt, wash, mix, crush, squish, and poke anything I needed. We were making good progress. I then almost got blown up. This is becoming a habit. I started day 77 nervously, eating apples to regain my strength, and then decided to jam a whole lot of chests and barrels into this corner of my new workshop. This was not for practical purposes, I just thought it'd look cool. And it did. To make this area useful though, I decided I was going to link up my warehouse to another clerk over here. This would give me much easier access to the storage warehouse when I was in my workshop. The next day I got to work doing just that, installing a stock ticker and some packages, and contemplating how I was going to link up the chain conveyor. I had stairs going into the wall that was opposite the current warehouse entrance, so that meant I'd need to go around the back. I crafted some more components, then got to testing locations for the chains. They immediately got overstressed however, so I added a couple more water wheels to the system, got jump scared by a zombified pigling and punched him, then promptly died in the panic. I spawned just a few blocks away, however, and soon got my revenge. I then reinstalled the chain, slept through the night, and set about completing the system link on day 79. I added some frogports to send and retrieve items, then installed a couple of windows so I could see items coming and going. That made me very happy. Now all I needed was a clerk, so I set off back to the local village. The sun started going down, so I turned on the shaders and enjoyed the ride. Upon arrival, I tricked a cleric into a boat using a bed, and then set off. I made a slight boo-boo, however, and ended up below the ocean, so the cleric tried to leg it and I wrangled him back into a boat further back. I eventually got him to the river, however, and upon arriving home, I led the former cleric to the workshop using a bed, defending him from zombies along the way. Things swiftly went downhill when the zombies broke in, villager legged it, and I got backed into a corner in my workshop. I have no idea where the villager went, so I led a zombie into the clerk's seat, but it didn't work. I should have known, really. It was now day 80, and I didn't fancy trying that again, so I just grabbed my dog and promoted him to clerk instead. I tested the system, promptly realised I'd forgotten to set any addresses, so I grabbed a clipboard to rectify the situation. I ran some more tests, everything worked, and I was pleased. I still had plenty to do in here, but I placed my bed and decided to move on for now. My iron production hadn't been running for a while, so I decided it was time to start on the mega factory. I only had 20 days left, but at least I could make some progress. Or so I thought. I was low on tuff and out of copper, so I turned my drill into a giant drill and went on a mining mission. Cue the music. Upon my return on day 84, I smelted the copper, made some tanks, steam engines and a bunch of other stuff, as I was going to make a proper power station. I couldn't really power a factory without one. I also removed the old iron farm to create some space, but making power also meant I was going to need more blaze burners. I flattened some iron, finally made myself some diamond armor, as my record had not been too great so far when it came to survival. I grabbed a sword and went to the underworld once more. It was a swift journey with, thankfully, no incidents. I found a blaze spawner, so filled up my bonus from there and went straight back to the overworld. I had decided on a max size steam power plant for maximum power, so I installed a separate system to keep it full of water and then got to work on fueling the burners. This required me to go into the Nether and work out a lava pumping system to keep the fuel coming, which took a lot of back and forth. But eventually I had a system that would take buckets to the Nether, fill them up and send them back to the overworld. I just needed to actually feed them into the power station now. On day 88 I made a mechanical arm, some funnels and depots, and then created a very basic system to feed the lava into the burners. Then they would dispose of the empty buckets, which would go back to the Nether to be refilled. I did a little bit of testing to make sure it had worked well, then got to work making the shiny new power station look good. I started by further reducing the platform size on one side and expanding it on the other. I then surrounded the power station with a giant brick cube inlaid with some tuff. I'd make this look nice later, but for now I just needed to get down some basic shapes, like this random bit missing from the back. I added the outline of a balcony type area around the front of the building, then added a white bit on the side using some diorite with an acacia roof and a jungle trim to match the building from earlier, some windows, an interior floor, and another sticky outy bit on the other side of the building. I decided to sleep as little as possible as I only had 10 days left and wanted to get this building finished. I did receive the occasional visitor while doing all this, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. As day 90 drew to a close, I started to add a bit of variation to the buildings, broke my pick, made a new one, and by morning I was deep into decorating the exterior. I added balcony railings, barrels, note blocks, random create bits from my storage, tanks, pipes, shafts, and so on. By the end of day 92, I had a roof on the building and was applying the final touches with tough and copycat steps on the front and a ladder on the back. On day 93, I ate an apple and was pleased at how it was all looking out there. Not too bad. Not great, but not bad. What did look bad, however, was the surroundings, so I grabbed a bunch of stone, coarse dirt, rooted dirt and more, and then got to work. I spent the day placing a path between the buildings using the stone and some variants, then heard the telltale screeches of death as the sun went down, so decided maybe I would actually sleep tonight. I was clearly lethargic and needed the rest. Next morning, I continued landscaping, scattering coarse and rooted dirt around the path and building edges, added a bit of gravel to blend it all together nicely, grabbed my shears to cut some grass and leaves, and then added this alongside some stones to make it look nice. By nightfall, the path was done. But there was a problem. A big white box of a problem that really needed some detail. I'd have to rectify that tomorrow. So I started by mixing some diorite, white wool, calcite and polished diorite into the walls, then decided to swap out the supporting beams from dark oak to industrial iron and some girders. It definitely looked a lot better. I once again grabbed a bunch of random items from my storage and scattered these about out the front and added some lighting as the sun retreated. I decided it was time to increase my storage as my tree farm was overproducing and I had filled up a lot of my vaults with wood. So I pressed some iron, crafted some barrels, crafted some more vaults and got to work. I fleshed out the vaults on the right hand side, adding more packages, stock links and frogports, I love those guys, and added a couple more on the opposite wall. Now I had much more storage. And although things were starting to look more complete, I still had a huge landscape problem around the back of the power plant. So I grabbed up all the dirt I had, which turned out not to be that much, and got to placing blocks. It got dark, I almost got blown up. Twice. So I went to bed with a view to continuing this the next day, day 97. The problem was I'd been followed home, and as I went to leave, a creeper blew up my doors. I quickly replaced them, then got to work. I'd run out of dirt and grass, however, so I stole some from the area I was about to cover over. By day's end, I'd covered up the holes and things were generally looking a lot nicer. That is until I went outside the next day and spotted my very ugly looking tree farm. I still had a couple of days left, however, so the race is on to get it looking good before day 100. I started by removing the whole thing altogether and then made a new platform for it to sit on and changed my approach to the design. But for this, I was going to need a whole lot more deployers. I worked through the night once more, crafting deployers and saws, this time fitting it all onto a minecart contraption so I can make a much better use of space. I also decided to connect it all to the main storage, so added a packager, frogport and a new connection to the chain drive. After assigning saplings to the deployers, I was finally ready to turn it on day 99. It was working a treat, but it did need a bit of light, so I added a fence around the outside with some lanterns on the pillars, then got to connecting the newly revamped farm up to the main path. This went into the night, however, and I got attacked by numerous zombies, shortly before being jump scared by a creeper. My quick retreat, however, saved explosions, and I quickly dispatched the fiend. As the sun started to rise, I climbed atop my power station, ready to greet day 100. And here we are, day 100, and I've got weird goggles on my face. What's that all about? And although we made some progress, it wasn't as much as I was hoping to make. I did have plans to build a whole mega factory, but, well, we just ran out of time. But if you did enjoy this video and you do want to see another 100 days, let me know in the comments, like, subscribe, do all the things. And if this video does well, then I guess maybe we can come back and make the everything factory. I think these frogs might be my new favorite thing. I love them.